What is good, everybody? My name is Tatro, and today we're going to be checking out the sampler in BandLab, a really fun creative tool where you can bring in your own samples or even record your own samples, edit and manipulate them, and start incorporating them as a part of your beats, or build up your beats entirely with the sampler. If you've never used the sampler before, don't worry, we're going to build this up from the ground up, so even if you've never used it, you're going to be on a solid foundation. Previously on this channel, we've already covered the drum machine and the virtual instruments, so if you're looking for basic tutorials on those, I highly recommend you start there and then come to the sampler video. That's enough talking for now, let's dig into the sampler. I'm going to press the plus button, and let's go ahead and dive into the sampler. Sampler is cool because you can record any sound that you want and kind of use it as a drum if you want. So I'm going to tap and hold a pad to start recording, and I'm going to snap. We're going to record that sound. There we go. It's recorded that sound. It's normalized it for us. It's pretty much cropped it for us too. You can go ahead and repeat that process and record as many sounds as you want, including voice. Woo! Woo! Kind of goofy, right? We can also import our own samples or build our own drum kit in this sampler. Let me show you how to do that. We're going to go to the pencil icon, and this is going to allow us to individually edit different sounds. Woo! So I could edit that little woo, bring the volume down on it for sure, but I brought the pitch down and I brought the volume down. Woo! 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 It's just kind of funny. But then I can go to this edit icon here, which is going to allow me to further edit this sound as well. For instance, right now when I press, it's not playing the full sample unless I hold down the pad. For drums, a lot of the time, we don't want that. We want it just to press it and it plays the whole sound. So I'm going to go ahead and change this from gate mode, which is that action of having to hold down the button to let the whole sound play, to one-shot mode, which is going to allow us to just tap and a whole sound plays. Woo! Woo! All right, I think that woo sounds pretty cheesy, so I'm just going to hit delete on it, and we got rid of it. But what you'll notice now is that when I select an empty pad, we get these options, import audio or video, which is really interesting. So any files you have imported to your device, or the browse icon. In the browse icon, we're going to get access to the selection of amazing sounds on BandLab once again. This time, I'm going to click specifically into one-shots. One-shots are just single sound samples versus other samples that might be full loops or full phrases. These are just meant to be single sounds, one-shots. Let's try to select a percussion sound first. Let's preview the sound. Okay. Simple little clave sound. I've imported that into our kit. And once again, it might be hard to detect, but we're in gate mode. So I am going to edit that sound to one shot. Don't forget we have other options, again, like pitch. And I can also click and hold and copy that to another pad, which would mean I could create two different versions of that same sound if I wanted to. But let's do something a little more conventional. I've clicked on an empty slot here, and I'm going to press browse once again. We're in one shots already from last time. I've clicked off of percussion so I can select a different category, and I'll select kick. Let's just import that kick. There it is. Let's edit that sound once again to be a one-shot sound. There's other options here too, but not all of them are really super useful for drums. For instance, the attack, which is going to be the initial start of a sound. For drums, they kind of only have a start. So if we mess with the attack, it's just going to make the drum sound weaker. I'll show you how that can apply to other samples in the future. Tone, though, is something that could be helpful for drums. If you want to round out the sound and get only low frequencies, we can use that tone slider. The tone slider is also useful for getting only high frequencies out of a sound. Slide that up. But on a kick, that's not a really good idea because now we've lost all that low frequency. All right, great. We've got that. Let's add one more sample here. Let's, of course, add a snare. Again, deselecting kick, finding snare. looking at this full selection of snares and sounds that are available, you can spend hours and hours digging for drum sounds. Let's go ahead and select that one. That's fine. Same edit process we did before. I will go ahead and turn that to one-shot mode. And it's a little bit of a harsh snare, actually. I don't love that sound. So let's delete it, and let's quickly just add a much simpler, softer snare if we can. Something shorter, less harsh. That will do just fine for the purposes of our demo. One-shot mode. That works. And a very cool thing that we can do with any of these instances of making drums, right, is connect a MIDI controller. So I've got my Akai MPK Mini here that has some drum pads. Let's go ahead and connect this to the iPad. All right, so now we're connected, and this is going to align with our sampler. See that? There's no pad, there's no sound on this pad here, so we're not getting any responses from the empty pads. But we do have all of those. So we could use that to play in. Similarly to what we were doing before. This is actually the same process as before. So we've already turned on our count in to 1 bar, and now we can record. So there we go. Another simple drum pattern there. But let's review some of the stuff we've already talked about. This way, you can definitely know the basics of editing your drums. Never hurts to go over something again. I'm double clicking to get into that menu where I can edit the MIDI. Now we're going to highlight our notes here, go back into that quantization menu. And now the kick and the snare are playing really simple patterns. So I could select eighth notes. But these little clave sounds, they're playing something a little bit faster. They're playing something closer to 16th notes. So I'm going to try to quantize everything to 16ths. I don't have to quantize the kick and snare to eighths because they're close enough. They're hitting close enough. But if there were any problems where a snare or a kick was not in the quite right spot as a result of that, I would just pay attention. But oftentimes, as long as you quantize to the highest value that you have, if everything's pretty close, it'll work pretty well. So there we go. This is just another way to get to making drums in BandLab once again. The cool thing about Sampler is you're building up your own kit. And actually, for instance, let me show you, it doesn't have to be just drums, right? Like you could load full loops into this drum kit, and you can load actually any kind of sound that you want. And it's a sampler too, right? So you can record literally any sound you want into it. These are just weird effects sounds. Let's load that in because that's fun. All right, so now I've got this. Let's go ahead and edit that sound to be a one shot once again. And we could even do things like reverse the sound. Here's what it sounds like. That's pretty funny. I'm just going to reverse it back, but that is an option there. So you can really mess and mangle with the sounds in Sampler, which is very cool. Okay, so instead of recording in on top of this, I want to show you that this works exactly the same way as our previous method, where we can go into this MIDI roll and we can preview what sounds are on what pad. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw in on the 8th row. Let's have that line up with our snare. It's kind of silly, but just to show you that you can put any kind of sound you want into a sampler. But just be careful because our song is at a given tempo, and if you start putting sounds into your sampler that have their own tempo, things are going to start to sound off. And that's why this vocal sample, it works, but not so well because it's doing something rhythmic, that has a rhythm to it. So it sounds a bit off in the context of this tempo and this beat here. So just be careful of that. That's why we try to use one shots that have no rhythmic element to them. So until you're ready to go more advanced, perhaps we can make a video on that in the future. Just keep it simple with these simple one-hit sounds in your sampler. One final note here too is that all of these little clips that we've been creating, you have multiple ways to edit them. You can split them into different parts. I'll undo that. You can extend them. We already covered that. And you can continue to extend them if you want. And this is an easy way to extend a single loop without editing a full 4-bar loop. We can just take this 1-bar loop and extend it for 4 bars. Hence why these 3 remaining bars are faded, because it's just telling us this is just repetition of this first idea. We can copy things. So if you want something to happen later in your song, after hitting copy, we can paste it later. One last thing that's going to help you get your drums to sound exactly how you want them to sound, we have access to effects here. So on any given track, you can press the effects button. And just like we have access to a ton of sounds on BandLab, we also have access to a ton of effects. If I use the search bar here, I can search for drum specific effects. And you'll notice there's quite a few. So if I select drum distortion, this is going to change my sound. I'm going to close the search. We see that drum distortion is here on our track now. And we can see what that contains. It contains a driver, an EQ, and a compressor. Let's play this back. It just sounds more gritty and driven, right? And that's because of the drive, which we can go and edit. I can just crank that drive up. This is going to sound crazy. But it's a way to get a different kind of sound. You can delete individual effects in these effect racks, or you can add single effects if you don't want to load up a pre-made effect rack. So let's go and find something simple like reverb. It's going to have the most dramatic effect. Let's just select Space Maker, to which we get a bunch of different parameters like the mix of it, the size of the reverb, the dampening, and this is going to alter our sound in a different way. One more way to just get the sound that you want to get. Do you want grittier drums? Do you want spacey sounding drums? Do you want some kind of echo on your drums? It's up to you, and it's all possible here on BandLab. So I hope this was a helpful walkthrough of the fundamentals of making drums in BandLab. We will be continuing on with this series and covering more of the fundamentals of not just how to use BandLab, but how to make music. If you enjoyed this, give this video a like, let us know in the comments down below. I've got my own channel. If you like my teaching style, you can check that out. My name's Tetro here for BandLab. Have a good one.